This is the Making Waves podcast, sponsored by Ripple Effect. My name is Dave Rhoden, and I'm here with Scott Odenbach. What district are you from, Scott?
Hey, Dave. I represent District 31, which is all of beautiful Lawrence County out in the Black Hills, and appreciate the chance to be with you today and talk to you and your listeners about some of these big issues we're facing.
There are a number in the legislature right now, one of which is House Joint Resolution 5001. Could you tell us just a little bit about that, what it means?
What it means is we're going to change the way we've selected our candidates for our constitutional offices, our statewide offices in South Dakota, from the way we've done it really, I think, since about 1917. And instead of nominate these people at our state conventions where our precinct people have a say in who it is, we're going to end up putting those all at a statewide primary, which is, subject to such an influence of big money, outside money, et cetera. And so the offices that we're talking about are Lieutenant Governor, Attorney General, Secretary of State, State Auditor, State Treasurer, Commissioner of School and Public Lands, and the PUC commissioners. And then, of course, in the years when we have a presidential election, the precinct people choose the presidential electors and the national committee man and committee woman of the party. A lot of this was sparked, back in 2022 with the convention that I guess some would characterize as out of control and others would characterize as, a grassroots uprising. And so, I think there's a consensus probably in the legislature that the governor should select their own lieutenant governor candidate. And there's a bill Senator Melhoff is doing in Senate Bill 13 to do that. And I think that'll have broad support. But HJR 5001 goes much further and really upends, more than a century of a way that's worked really well, I think, and it's frankly Republican form of government rather than pure democracy.
What people don't understand, I think, is that these precinct people do represent their constituents. They are elected to their precinct by the Republicans in their precinct, and those are the people that go on to nominate the nominees at convention. Exactly.
I've had a good bit of experience with precinct people in my life, going all the way back as a young man when I used to be executive director of the Minnehaha County Party back in the 90s. And we managed to get a whole lot done by filling all those precinct slots and working very closely with those party activists who were, really the backbone of the party and of being able to push through a conservative agenda. And if we basically dilute their influence and dilute the ability of those types of folks to be involved and have an influence, it's going to be a whole different party, really, with a whole different focus on, probably more national issues or issues driven by, shall we say, moneyed elites who can push the agenda away from the things that otherwise grassroots people might focus on.
I think what a lot of people don't understand, that in a primary, it's going to cost quite a bit of money to run in a primary if you're running for PUC or you're running for treasurer, and that does mean that donors have a lot more influence over the process. It's a statewide office you're running for as a primary, and running for Secretary of State or treasurer or auditor. These are offices that would have required a lot of them, so it'd be a lot of money involved here with running a primary.
Yeah, I don't know anybody who might want to step up, say, for example, to run for commissioner of school and public lands if you had to, raise $500,000 to get in the ring against a different candidate that might be favored by, folks with more money or establishment or whatever you say, or whatever you call it, excuse me. I just think that there was a reason the founders of South Dakota had put the existing situation in place. And I think the most conservative, quote unquote, move here is to leave it just as it's been.
And it's a system that's worked for over a century, as you said.
It has. Again, I say that with an asterisk by the lieutenant governor, because I think that as close as they need to work together, I think there's a great argument. It makes sense, and I will probably be voting for, unless I hear something really out of the ordinary or a really good argument, I'll be supporting that bill. I think Senator Melhoff and Representative Baumüller have a good bill there to deal with that.
I agree with you. I've been advocating for several years now that the lieutenant governor should simply be elected or selected by the governor candidate once they win the primary. It's a more rational system, and it allows the party more flexibility to move their convention possibly to before the primary, which would make it much more relevant to the party and to the primary, in fact.
Right.
This bill, one thing I was going to mention is that in conjunction with this bill, we have the open or primaries initiative that's going around. The Democrats want to open the primaries so that, frankly, Democrats can vote in the Republican primaries. So this would be an angle that people don't seem to realize. We're going to try to open the primary so Democrats can vote in the Republican primary, and then at the same time open up all our nominations to the primary system.
Right. I see this moving us in that direction. And so, the Democrats are so far out of the mainstream with the positions that they're taking that they've become, almost irrelevant. And this is a way to begin to let them claw back to relevance without having to possibly change their policy positions to get more in line with where the voters of South Dakota are. And I think it's also part of a larger theme of, you hear people like Hillary Clinton, for example, always talking about our democracy, or President Biden, our democracy. Well, we have a republic. As Ben Franklin said, what kind of system have you given us, sir? And he answered, a republic if you can keep it. And moving us, moving us towards this idea of all these questions have to be part of a direct democracy submitted right to the voters, get rid of the electoral college, get rid of precinct people, what have you, is not necessarily the system that we were given by our founders, whether as our nation or as a state. And so, this open primaries, making us more like the big states, the big cities, I'm not sure that's a direction we ought to just travel down willy-nilly without thinking through the larger consequences.
One of the arguments that's been used to support this idea, at least open primaries and some of the others, is that there are less than half of the offices are primaried. But I'd like to point out it's the Democrats who lack primaries. I believe it was in 2016. And correct me if I'm wrong, they only had 3 primaries in the entire state. Republicans have primaries. Republicans do compete with each other and put up candidates and have competition with each other. And so I don't think that argument really applies to either 5001 or the open primaries initiative.
Yeah, I think if your party is relevant and active and vibrant and recruiting candidates and debating issues, it's going to have primaries. It's going to have people competing within them. And so I guess the arguments from the Democrat side of things, it's relevant insofar as state law applies to all parties, and it's going to apply to them as well. And I think whether you're Republican or Democrat, you should take a tough look at whether you'd want to just throw this system out. But this bill, let's be clear, I guess I'd say this bill and this debate is really an internecine warfare issue within the Republican Party that stems from the 2022 convention. And it's something that we in the party are in the midst of hashing out. What is a conservative? What do we stand for? And this is just a small piece of that larger debate.
I think I'd point out that it goes back before 2022. They tried this before, and this has been tried previously after the 2018 convention, and I think that part of it here is sour grapes. There's some people who did not get the result that they wanted, so they want to change the system. Right, and that may be the case, and I guess I always come down on the side of if you're losing, make better arguments. Work harder. Don't change the rules. Well, Scott, thank you for being on with us. Is there any final thoughts before we sign off? Just appreciate the chance to expound on this a little bit more, Dave, and I would encourage all your listeners to stay vigilant and reach out to their legislators and find out, if they're supporting this and urge them not to. Thank you, Representative Odenbach. Really appreciate it. This has been the Making Waves podcast. My name is Dave Rhoden.